Hi, I'm Dr. Aimie. Welcome to this blog video. Today we are talking about attachment trauma and how the nervous system gets stuck in the freeze response in attachment trauma. So let's review briefly the two survival responses. And here in this picture you can see that the two survival responses are first the sympathetic response, and that's going to be your very active, huge energy rush to your muscles where you are going to fight or you're going to run in order to survive. If that does not work, or if your brain decides that that will not work, then it will go into the freeze response. And the freeze response is the parasympathetic branch, specifically the dorsal vagus branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. And so what happens is that here is the picture of kind of the time frame of a person responding to a threat. They get that initial startle, and that's where their sympathetic starts to rise, and their parasympathetic, the ventral part, which is your thrive, socialize, digest, rest, that starts to go down because now is not the time to lay back. And so you're trying to assess your environment and deciding what to do as your sympathetic is charging up and you're getting that energy. But then if, for whatever reason, your brain decides that it cannot survive by fighting or running away, then it will pick up that parasympathetic, the dorsal vagus, and it'll go into the freeze response. The key feature here is the gas pedal of the sympathetic charge is still fully on. Just the freeze response, which is the inhibition of that activity, is also fully on and just slightly more powerful. So that you have the gas pedal on and the brake pedal on at the same time. That's a lot of exhaustion for a body. And especially as this pattern gets wired into the nervous system, it becomes their chronic pattern of response to a threat. This is extremely exhausting for people. So, how is it then that children who have attachment disorder can react so strongly even though they have this freeze response wired into their system? Well, there's two parts of it. One part is that as they go into the freeze response, they hate themselves for going into the freeze response and they have all this shame about it. And so they're kind of reacting to that shame and turning a lot of that anger towards themselves as well as to other people. And they can be doing this while they are in the freeze response and to a certain extent dissociated. They're not really realizing what they're doing, and it's only later that they kind of come back into their bodies and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, very remorseful. But in other ways, that since that sympathetic charge is just underneath the freeze response, as the person comes out of the freeze response, they're going to have this surge of energy. And it needs to be discharged, and that's part of the problem with the freeze response is that a lot of times the wiring gets set to ignore the freeze response, try to overpower it, and they never complete their survival cycle. And so it's this accumulative burden of trauma that gets into their system. So, how can you as a professional or parent working with a child like this really start to heal their system? Part of it is, yes, working with a practitioner who can work with the nervous system, and whether that's somatic experiencing or some other practitioner, that will be an important piece. Another part, though, is to become an expert on their nervous system and be able to identify when they're going into freeze, what does that look like for that child? And then what do they look like when they're coming back? How do you know when they're fully back in their bodies? And these are such subtle things that you're looking for. You're looking for their muscle tension. You're looking for how they carry themselves, how they walk, how they sit down. Do they kind of just collapse and slouch when they sit down? Or are they always, tense and muscles are just really tight? They're hypervigilant. Those are the subtle things that you are going to be watching for and starting to really become an expert in identifying and knowing. And then we really want to prevent the accumulation of more trauma burden on their system. And so when they do have these startle responses, for whatever reason, whether it's because they fell down in the park or whether something in the house, in the home triggered them, whatever the startle is, give them time, stay with them close by, physically, emotionally, and just give them time until they are fully back in their body and they're no longer in that hypervigilant, I hate you, sympathetic charge type of state. So I hope that you've enjoyed this blog video, and I look forward to hearing your comments about what you're noticing about your child's nervous system.